as what we Chinese say, 工欲善其事，必先利其器.
What that means is that for a craftsman to excel, he must first sharpen his tools.
And today we will talk about the bows. This is a typical example of a modern Asiatic laminated bow.
We'll give a quick overview of the components. So this is the tip. In an Asiatic bow, this is usually static or not bending. Sometimes it will point forward, sometimes it will point backwards. It really depends on the geometry or the shape of the bow. Sometimes with Asiatic bows, especially with the tips pointing forward, you will see a string bridge or a string pad. It might be small like this, it might be bigger in some other types of bows. It's usually meant to catch the string in case you have a really bad release, but bows often don't need this. Now down here is the transition between the tip and the bending limb. This transition is called the brain or the gongnao in Chinese. It's also known as the kasan in other cultures. This part here does the work. This is the working limb, the bending limb. And then this section here is the handle or the riser. This is where the archer is going to be holding the bow. This part is usually not bending in an Asiatic bow. So this part here is the handle, and it has the main handle itself where the archer is holding, and then you have an arrow pass where the arrow will be held. Now this arrow pass, it can be made with materials such as leather, suede. In this case, this is ray skin. It's a very durable material. Then finally, putting this bow in tension is the string. This is where you'll hook the arrow onto, and this can be made of natural materials such as silk or linen, but typically what you'll see these days are artificial materials such as dacron, fast flight, dyneema, those kinds of things.
In general, today's Asiatic bows are available in three categories of materials.
On the entry-level end are bows made of solid fiberglass or solid plastic. This is an example of a bow made with solid plastic limbs, and this is an example of a bow made with solid fiberglass limbs. Now you don't see the fiberglass directly because the fiberglass portion of the limbs is usually wrapped with leather.
The second categories are laminated bows.
Laminated bows are typically constructed with a core made of bamboo or wood in the middle, and a layer of fiberglass on the belly and the back. The fact that you have a wood or bamboo core lightens up the mass of limb in a laminated bow, making it more efficient compared to a solid fiberglass limb bow. Sometimes with laminated bows, you'll see extra layers of material in the core, such as stable core fiberglass, which is a crossweave glass that enhances stability, or you'll see a layer of carbon fiber, which helps further lighten the limb and helps with stability as well, in some cases. Overall, if the laminated bow is well constructed, you'll have an efficient, pleasant bow to use for everyday shooting.
The third categories are natural material bows.
So among the natural material bows that the Chinese used in the past include bamboo bows. Here's an example right here. They also used wood bows, and also bows that were a combination of wood and then sinew on the back. Now the pinnacle of natural bows in the Asiatic sphere, in the Chinese sphere, were horn composite bows. Bows made with a combination of horn on the belly, wood or bamboo in the core, and then sinew on the back, all bound together with animal glue such as fish glue or hide glue. Now, a natural bow may not be as fast or efficient as a laminated bow, but there's a certain appeal to shooting with and owning a natural bow. It's kind of like you're dealing with a living, breathing being, because the poundage is going to change based on the weather, how hot it is, how wet or dry it is, and each bow will have its own character to it. So it's almost like owning a pet. And also by shooting with natural bows, you're supporting the craftsmen who are helping preserve the heritage and the culture behind Asiatic archery.
In general, there are two types of bows. One is 小烧, small tips. One is 大烧, big tips.
Now small tip bows are optimized for speed. They have a smaller tip up here, minimizes the mass. It helps with shooting lighter arrows faster. The small tip bows have a little bit of a forward angle here. That helps give you a little more leverage to pull the limb and store a little extra energy, make the pull a little smoother. That helps with the efficiency. Now, big tip bows come in a couple different flavors. Both of them have larger tips, so they're more suitable for medium to heavy arrows. Now, if the large tip is pointed backwards, like this, then it's optimized for stability. That is, forgiveness for bad release errors. Because the tip is pointed backwards throughout the whole draw. Whereas, if you have a large tip bow with a large forward pointed tip, that's designed to help make the pull very smooth, but to store a lot of energy because you have more leverage to pull the limb. So this is good for very heavy arrows.
Okay, so you want to get your first bow, and it's very important to figure out the pointage of the bow, and usually the pointage are measured at 28 inches of draw length, and for people for the boyer back in mainland, they usually measure from the belly of the bow and all the way to 28 inches. But for boyers around the world, and they usually measure the weight, the draw length from the back of the bow all the way to 28 inches. And usually it's very important to know the maximum draw length of the bow. So usually if you are taller and you have like a longer arm and you draw longer, you might want to get a longer bow and maybe have like a longer like a maximum draw length. And usually, like, it's if the bow is measured at 28, the weight is measured at 28 inches, and let's say like the maximum draw length of the bow is 30 inches, and usually just add 3 pounds per inch. But that's just a rule of thumb. It's better to measure it at a pro shop.
Yeah, and then, again, it's important to make that distinction between measuring from the belly versus the back of the bow, because that difference can be about 1 to 1 1/4 inches.
Yes, that's right. Right. We'll talk about the structure of the bow. Hey, Justin, what do you think about the handle? What kind of handle do you prefer?
Well, speaking from personal experience, I prefer handles that are a little on the smaller side, just because it's a little more comfortable for me to grip. A smaller handle is less susceptible to torque,
Yep.
like twisting by the bow hand. And also, after I release, a smaller handle, it's going to have a little sort of give, a little more play to it, a little bit more cushioning, so that it won't interfere as much with the arrow flight. In addition to that, with the handle, there's the arrow pass component. Sometimes you'll see designs where it's a little thicker on the handle and a little narrower on the arrow pass. That's okay. Because what you want with an arrow pass is you want it to be narrow so that the arrow doesn't have to bend around as much to get a clean shot. If you have a fatter arrow pass, then you have to choose just the right arrow. Yeah, exactly. Just the right spine, just the right arrow in order to make it work.
Yeah.
So, let me give you an example. So, or at least something to help illustrate as a counterpoint. So this is a 95-pound bow. Its handle is pretty thick. Very
big from my angle.
Yeah, and it's not it makes for a little more of an awkward hold. Of course, for engineering purposes, you kind of have to have a bigger handle for a heavier bow because it's taking you have to have something that's strong enough to take the stress.
That's right.
But you don't want to see a big handle for like a 30-pound bow. Like that's just it's a way over engineering. So, a sign of a poorly made bow is that if it's light but has a really fat handle, that's a no-go.
Yeah. And what do you think about the bending section? What bending section?
Well, here's something I learned from Larry Hatfield, who is a master bow maker. He used to be the head bow designer for Martin Archery back in the day, and he still holds multiple world records for flight archery. And something he told me as a good rule of thumb is that the moment you start to pull the bow, even 1 inch, if you feel the weight starting to build up here, that means that you have a lot of the working limb is actually like doing work. You know, if you have to pull it 3-4 inches and then you start to feel the weight building up, that means that all you're doing is really just trying to lift the string off of the tip, and the limb isn't even beginning to work yet. But that's not the case with this bow. This bow, I pull it just 1 inch and I can feel it start to work. And it's not an accident also that this is a 52 to 53 pound bow. But I'm getting it to, yeah, exactly. And I'm getting it to bend quite easily like this. And that's because most of this limb is ready to work. It's ready to bend. So this is actually a characteristic of a fast bow.
That's right.
You know, and of course speed is not everything. You know, but if you happen to have a bow that has this sort of characteristic, then you probably have a fast bow in your hands. In fact, this is one of the fastest laminated bows that I have.
Hey Justin, what do you think about the tips of the bow?
Yeah, so the tips, there are a couple of different characteristics that you want to look for. One is stability and one is efficiency. So I mentioned previously that the sort of the front to back bending, that's a good characteristic of a fast bow, but there's another kind of wiggliness that you don't want in the bow, which is the side to side wiggliness.
Yeah.
So this bow here, it's very hard for me to twist it left and right, and that means that this bow has high torsional stability. You know, same with this bow as well. I try to twist it left and right, very hard to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So these bows will be pretty forgiving to errors in the release, because if you have a bad release, it makes the string kind of oscillate. If the bow is twist resistant, if it has high torsional stability, then it won't be as messed up by a bad release, and it'll be more forgiving to shoot with.
Yes.
Something like this bow, very fast, a little more wiggly in the side to side dimension, which means that you have to have a little bit of a cleaner release.
That's right.
To shoot this consistently. Now the torsional stability is one factor. The other factor is the mass of the tips, how efficient it can be. Here's an example of a tip that is going to be relatively efficient. Not only is it sort of narrow in this profile, it has very little above the string notch as well. It's like from here to here, it's like a lever. The more mass you put on here, the greater effect it's going to have on the efficiency of the shot, because not only does the bow have to move the arrow, it's got to move the bow limb back into place after the shot. A little bit of extra mass closer to here, near the handle, that's okay. But a little bit of mass up here has a big effect. So you want to definitely find a bow that's a little more slim, a little more reduced in this.
Especially for lower poundage.
Yeah, I'll show you an example of something that you don't want. Like this one right here, the tip, let's see, the string ends here, and so it has a lot of this extra dead mass up on top here. This does nothing for structural integrity. All this does is slow things down.
And more mass, just.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a slow bow. I can just look at it and I can tell it's a slow bow.
That's it.
Yeah. All right. So here's a Manchurian bow, Qing Dynasty bow, and what you'll see often with the reproductions of these is that they're going to try to mimic the tip dimensions of the antiques. Antique, like military bows, which were 80, 90, 100, probably even higher draw weights.
120 even.
Yeah, and but if you're trying to shoot this with something that's like say 40 pounds, like you're gonna lose a lot of efficiency, because those tips were meant for heavier bows, but you're trying to shoot a lighter draw weight with that. So there are actually modern day reproductions of Qing Dynasty bows with slimmer tips, so try to look out for those. But I think
that will help a lot when you shoot, especially doing like target shooting.
yeah.
What
kind of bowstring material do you prefer?
It really depends. With the string materials that are most available with bows today, you'll either run into things like Dacron, which is a softer type of string material, or things like Fast Flight and Dyneema, which are stiffer. So with Dacron, it's a little softer, it's a little easier on the bow because it's a little more elastic, it'll stretch after the shot. You're probably going to feel a little more hand shock, but it's going to be safer for the bow overall.
Yes.
But it is going to be a little slower compared to something like Fast Flight and Dyneema. It's not going to stretch as much. If it stretches, it's going to be very little. So as a result, you're going to actually get faster arrow flight with something like Fast Flight and Dyneema. And but unfortunately, it's going to be a little harder on the bow as well. You have to ask the bowyer to make sure that the tips are reinforced, so that it's safe to use with Fast Flight and Dyneema. And the bow itself has to be more strongly built as well, because the string is not stretching after the release. So if there's any residual energy, it's going to transfer to the rest of the bow. So what advice do you have for beginners choosing their first bow?
Okay, first of all, get a cheaper bow. Just cheaper fiberglass bow, and see if you want to get into it or not. And because I see a lot of people, they spend a lot of money on a fancy bow for their first bow, and eventually it's just hanging on the wall. And second will be like, get a lower poundage, because at the beginning you don't have proper form, and you might mess up and injure yourself. And trust us, we learned it the hard way. This is no shame for you to shoot a 20-pound or 30-pound at the beginning. Because once you build up your form, you can just gradually go up. And
I'd say, speaking from personal experience, there's no quicker way to mess up your form than shooting with a bow that's too heavy.
Yes, indeed.
Now we are, we're teaching a style of military, Chinese Ming military archery, but you don't get to that poundage overnight. You have to develop your form step by step. And if you go too heavy, then you're going to have to spend a lot of time recovering your form after that. So definitely avoid that if you can.
That's right. And Justin, do you have any suggestion for the intermediate and advanced archers?
Well, so for intermediate archers at this point, you're kind of settled into your form. And to make the shooting experience a little more pleasant, you might consider upgrading to, say, a laminated bow. That's a pretty solid choice for everyday shooting. And you'll get a pretty big bang for your buck if you upgrade your arrows as well.
Yes.
Like that's the arrows are a huge factor in terms of your consistency.
Yeah.
Now, as for advanced archers, you might consider maybe increasing the draw weight of your bow. Not of the bow itself, but buying a new bow at incrementally higher draw weights. It depends. Like if you want to give yourself a physical challenge, you can consider upgrading your draw weight step by step. But it's totally cool, if you're comfortable with your current draw weight. If you want to get a nicer bow, like a nicer laminated bow, that's something that you might consider. Or if you really want to, if you feel like you're really hardcore, you're in it for life, you might consider getting a horn bow.
Okay. Thanks for watching the video. Hopefully you learned something, and just try to fully use your equipment and enjoy the shooting. All right. See you next time.